Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American Experience. And I am excited. Yes, I say it every time, but I'm really excited when I'm talking to my fellow Caribbeans about topics that are of interest to me, to them, and really benefits all of us. And this is a topic that I am excited to get into. But before we get into the topic, welcome to the podcast, Anthea. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm well, very, very well. I'm good to be here on a podcast with a Caribbean sister. I'm just
Yes.
leading the way and talking about important topics that matter to Caribbean people and to the diaspora and to the world. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So, why don't we tell the community of friends a little bit about who you are,
Mhm.
Caribbean country you represent, and about the work that you do?
Okay, so Anthea McLaughlin, a Caribbean sister. My journey is shaped by my Caribbean heritage. I would say my experiences are multifaceted and multi-country. My years have been spent working in New York City, where I spent a lion's share of my personal and professional life. Born in the UK, strong ties to the Caribbean, and family connections in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, where I live currently. And I would see that my early years, I saw the power of community driven giving in my life, whether through informal support networks that we all are familiar with as Caribbean women or living in a Caribbean family, living in a Caribbean community, seeing churches, local leaders stepping up to the plate. But my time in New York City, I think, was a time where my approach to philanthropy was mostly defined there. Spent time, many years over. I won't say the. I hate to say the number, but it's over 17 years in New York City. I'm working in a public-private initiative, and there, as you know, working in New York City, you see a lot of things, but it's a city of immigrants again. You see resilience, you see innovation there right in front of you, but you also see issues of inequality when you're there. And so most of my time in my professional career, working in the child welfare system in particular, I saw a lot of inequities there. And that sort of mobilized me and pushed me to think more strategically about how do I help people? In what ways do I help people? And so my work has focused on education, education reform, in particular early care and education, spending time looking at under-resourced communities and how young children and families can access the early care and education system in particular. Child welfare and youth is something that was near and dear to my heart. We saw children when I was there in the early years. It was 84,000 children in foster care. Now we're down to 15,000, and I can say that my organization played a significant part in making that happen and making sure that our children actually got realigned and spent their time close to their communities where they were from. And I would also say that, in terms of workforce development issues, that was a big piece, looking at ways in which, families could actually access financial institutions and to get support for their livelihoods and get the skills that they need. So I say my philanthropic career was really transformative for me. But also at the same time, I recognize that, in the philanthropic system, whether within New York City, United States, and even if you look at the UK in particular, I never worked in the UK, but there's very much strong connections there in the Caribbean. That funding was really not driven necessarily by community, but by donor priorities, even there in the United States. And if you come here in the Caribbean, we also struggle with the same issues. And so I know that the importance of inclusion is important. Having locally led decision making and actions are also important. And the most important of all, as we all know, is trust, building trust in the system. Philanthropy is something that is dear to my heart, and I look forward to seeing a system that works on behalf of families and children, communities all over the world, and that we have a global philanthropy system that can support the Caribbean holistically, intentionally, and strategically. And that they get to see and experience the Caribbean the way I experience it, which is full of opportunity and innovation right here. And we just need to figure out how we can harness philanthropy to bring out all of that in the Caribbean.
Anthea, as you were talking, I was like, wait, I look like I have to bring Anthea back on one, two, three, four, five other topics. But
Yes,
for
yes.
right now, you didn't mention the name of the organization you are associated with.
Oh, Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So all my experience has taken me right to Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, where I worked. I was there as a board member. It started in 2019, and here I'm now leading the charge at the alliance to bring it to life in a real way where it impacts the communities across 22 countries. And so within the Caribbean, we're reshaping philanthropy as we know it, making sure that it's not a reactive response to crisis, but a long term strategic tool to resiliency and to empowerment. And that, the work of philanthropy is something that people will understand, that is not something that is separate and apart from them. When we think about philanthropy, sometimes we think about it's all the way up there in the ivory tower. And when we look at the history of the Caribbean in terms of philanthropy, we've always been philanthropists, in our communities. It's just a narrative that we have to understand and embrace and make it strategic and intentional. And so I'm here now to make that happen within the context of this organization, the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance.
You're so right. Philanthropy is such a big and bougie word,
Yes,
but, you know, every day, community neighbors, we practice philanthropy, especially when I saw it growing up, I saw it every day. Now, let's go back and let's talk a little bit about the mandate. Your experience covered a wide breadth of things that you would have done in the New York. So, what specifically does the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance cover? Um, and how do you engage people in the region and in the diaspora?
okay. So Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance covers so many areas, all areas that impact children, family, and communities' lives. So when we talk about Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, we talk about it as a space that is transforming philanthropy, and so that the resources that are in existence within the Caribbean and globally are equitable. And so it's important that philanthropic resources reach the people that it deserves to reach and that it reaches the communities and families in need. So that's important in an equitable way. We talk about it in terms of shifting the narrative. We want to make the case that the Caribbean is not just a recipient of aid, but a hub of innovation and resilience and solutions. That's key. We are mobilizing the diaspora. That's important as well. Caribbean diaspora is a global economic force. And by engaging the diaspora, it's important that we understand who they are. But is where we see it, the diaspora is a self-sustaining network that we need to tap into and we need to engage and support. And of course, bridging the global philanthropic community is important as well. We spend time working with international funders, national development banks, impact investors to align resources within the Caribbean. So it's really positioning the Caribbean as a strategic investment opportunity in the global philanthropic space. So we spend time there. And of course, in terms of our mission in particular, it's all about empowering Caribbean communities and making them self-sufficient. So, to do that, we have to move our philanthropy into the spaces of education and entrepreneurship and capacity building, so that our communities they can thrive on their own terms, is what I would say, and that our diaspora is there to provide the connections into the space as well. Caribbean philanthropy has four particular areas. So one is really as well, when we talk about philanthropy, and you talk about that the high tower reality, and the people see it as a way and separate from them. One of the things that we're doing at Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is creating a community within the philanthropic community within the Caribbean, and we're doing it by convening philanthropy. And as you know, we're small. We think big. We think we're big in the Caribbean, but we're tiny. 22 countries, but we're tiny countries. And we have to build that community so that people can come into a space and feel free to talk about the different issues that impact them within the philanthropic space as well. We have philanthropy that has been here for years. That have Digital Foundation, you have Sandals Foundations, you have all different types of foundations that have been here who have been giving, but they need a space to talk about how they're giving. And so the Philanthropic Alliance is giving them that opportunity to come together to talk strategically, intentionally about how they're giving and how they can maximize and leverage the resources that they are already giving within the Caribbean and to do it in a different way. We are in different times, so we need that space to think and also to build trust among each other. I think that's very critical. And then again, it's also about looking at the resources that come into the space. And so when we talk about equitable resources, we need to understand the type of resources that are coming in, whether it's from the global philanthropy community, from the diaspora community, remittance communities, wherever it's coming from, we need to understand it. So Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is that place in which we can begin to sort of dissect, disaggregate that data so that we can be more strategic about how we give. Giving is not just giving and just giving a check. It's how you give that check, how you give that money. And to give that money is to have relationships in communities. So we talk a lot about collaborative philanthropy and trust-based philanthropy. And it's looking at different ways and different practices in terms of how you give. But having a relationship with the community is most important. So you're able to give where it's needed, and you give it in an empowering way. That's the key. And then, of course, there are many initiatives that are occurring across the Caribbean, grassroots initiatives that have been there from the very beginning that need support. And so we call that within Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance regional accelerated actions, and we talk about in the context of sustainable development goals and all of those things. But you can get confused there. What we do know is that there's a lot of projects happening on the ground that need support, and they need support in a specific way. Their communities, marginalized communities, in particular women, they need to be fueled. And philanthropy needs to partner with them to ensure that they are able to provide the services and resources that they are providing currently in an empowering way. And so Philanthropy Alliance is really here to support the Caribbean community. And also at the same time, most importantly, is to provide the systemic change is within the philanthropic community as well. There are a lot of changes that we need to make, and the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is there to help to make those changes as well, in a way that people can hear it and implement it as well.
Absolutely. So, what I'm hearing, it seems like Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, you coordinate with the
Philan-
community, obviously, but you also are building partnerships with existing foundations that are already existing, right? But then are you also having direct communication with like maybe the diaspora or donors,
Right.
like everyday donors? Okay, great. So we
Right.
have all these three different um, elements in which you're engaging with the community:
Right.
individual donors, institutional donors, and then you have the community, the recipients of the donations.
Absolutely. So when we talk about global philanthropy, we're talking about regional philanthropy, which is the Caribbean region itself, and then global philanthropy in terms of international donors that are in the Caribbean that are actually providing resources. And that international community includes the institutional donors that we all know. So you would talk about the Bill Gates Foundation. You talk about the big donors that are in the space. We have Open Society Foundation that is here within the Caribbean, that has been here for a very, very long time, that is also part of the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. They are big donors in this space. And there are many more international donors that are wanting to come into the space as well, and need a place to able to navigate what they do with the money. So that's where we will come in. And then you have the donor communities, the individuals themselves, like the diaspora community, You could have high rollers that are interested in giving as well. They are donors and that are interested in finding out where to put their money. So they're all part of that global philanthropy community, and we now know that there are small pockets of money, and there's circles of giving that are happening here in the Caribbean, but also outside that can be created. They're already there. In our diaspora community, they're part of many different types of entities. You have church-based related kind of communities that are right that give all the time, particularly in disasters. They're part of that global community as well. And so the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is there for all of the global philanthropic community, whether large or small, and to help them navigate the space. So when I talk a lot about the communities, because we are sort of the bridge, we call ourselves the trusted navigator, that when you're coming into a space, that we'll be able to navigate you to the right place and to guide you where you need to go. And just to understand that the problems and the challenges are huge. The opportunities are also immense as well. So much opportunity in the Caribbean, and that you need a place in which you're able to navigate and understand what's happening on the ground.
So you mentioned disaster, which is
Mhm.
how we got here. So for context, I recorded that solo episode, just kind of talking about my frustration with hurricane relief and disaster relief, basically. And particularly last year with the hurricanes, there was a lot of activity going on in different places that were soliciting donations and funds. And to outsiders, and even to some people inside the community, it feels disjointed and disorganized. Like, I was surprised when someone texted me and was like, hey, what is a reputable organization that I should give my money to? Because there were so many donate here activities, they were like, wait, there are too many. I don't know which one to give and which one to trust. And
Mhm.
then I thought it was a one off thing. But I had maybe three more texts after that asking me the same question. And so that prompted me to record this episode, being really frustrated because hurricane happens every year in the Caribbean. And I feel like because we know that this happens every year, we're being very reactive to how we, one, begin to engage the diaspora in, all right, hurricane season, should we prepare, but not only the preparation, but the accountability. When we give this money, how do we know it's going where it's supposed to go? How do
Mhm.
we know it's being spent in the communities that we want it to be spent in? So I know I had shared the episode with you.
No,
So
yes, I saw the episode and I thought it was excellent, and it's timely. It's always timely for the Caribbean because we're not new to disasters, right? So, we, I think we are a poster when it comes to not only experiencing disasters, but how we survive and respond to disasters. In many cases, we are um, a region that can share how to respond and how you can be resilient. So I have to protect the Caribbean and say that are sort of we could be a role model for the world in terms of resiliency, and in particular in the climate space. I would say that there's a lot of work happening, and I think in your podcast you talked about Sedima in particular, and you said you just newly discovered Sedima. That, as you know, it is a CARICOM entity that supports the participating states in the Caribbean, 19 of them, and they have a particular way in which they respond to disasters. So the key thing here, there is a proactive system that exists in the Caribbean. It's here. And the key thing is, how do you access it? You know, I guess you could say there are several ways in look at it. Mitigation is the biggest one, right? So that's the prevention and risk piece. How do we reduce the severity of disasters before they occur? How do I identify those risks and implement strategies, right, to minimize that impact? And that is happening on the ground. The key thing is we need more support for it. So we need We need to assess the risks more. Assessments of those risks are important. What are some of the potential hazards that are happening? So you mentioned it, Carrie Ann, and you're not the expert in, but I thought you were very good. You talked about hurricanes, you talked about floods, you talked about earthquakes. Those are the potential hazards that are there with the assessment. So we need more money for those risk assessments so we can be proactive. The assessments around land use planning, I guess, is a big thing. Zoning laws, it's there, but we need to be more vigilant in the Caribbean around that. So when it happened last year with Hurricane Beryl, and you saw the devastation in Grenada, you saw it in Carriacou, it was monumental. Everything was flattened. And the first thing that came to my mind is, my God, so what were the zoning laws? What was the land use of? What was the construction laws? What was in place? You know, so looking at that is a big piece. How do we improve the infrastructure within the Caribbean before the disaster strikes? So we need to strengthen our roads, our buildings, our utilities, all those things. We also know that we're having less money coming into the system. We are international early warnings systems are being jeopardized, as you know, with cuts, right? So that's going to be one big piece. How do we implement technology now to detect and alert communities of impending disasters? We need money for that. We have meteorology, Caribbean meteorology institution for that, but they're going to need more money for that. And then, in terms of protection, environmental management protection, protecting our mangroves, our wetlands, our forests, but that needs money and resources. And there are many organizations that are here in the Caribbean that are doing that work. And what we need is probably you need a guide to figure out from the diaspora community of where to go to put that money. Caribbean Alliance is not a place that does all those things, obviously, but we are connected um, to the space with organizations that do that. So that's one. And then I'll just say, so I would say that's risk and mitigation. And then when you talk about preparedness, I think that was your big angst, actually. My God, how do we prepare, our communities? And again, we have plans. SEDEMA is the one, I guess, that does most of that, the disaster response plans. And they create all those emergency protocols, evacuation, sheltering, and all of that. But there's also a big civil society community here in the Caribbean that does the community awareness and education components of things, right? They are the ones that actually teach public about disaster risk and preparedness on the ground. So SEDEMA does the big broad stuff, and the civil society actually does the work on the ground. And we also know, that women are the ones that experience it first. They're the ones that are closest to the environment. Ones when a disaster happens, that they're the ones that have to take care of their children and figure it out on the ground how to ensure that their children are fed and at the same time providing food on the table. And so when we talk about community awareness and education, predominantly those are the people who do it are women. Women are the ones who do it. So we have to give money to organizations that provide supports to women within the space. That's risk. That's providing support right there and then. And then of course, then you have the resources that we all know Diaspora does a lot of work on, and that is, they are actually the ones that send resources to the Caribbean. So Carrie Ann, we don't want the resources when the disaster happens. We want it before, right? So that's the stockpile. So that's the stockpiling of resources. How do we stockpile
Oh,
food, water, medical
exactly.
supplies, equipment for rapid response? So SEDEMA, is that spot there they collect and then they connect all the civil society, but we need to have an intentional space for that, and that's something we could talk about as
Yeah.
well. And then I'll just say that, and I'll just keep that there. And of course, the communication systems, I would say strengthening the communication systems is also key. Information sharing between networks before, during, and after the disaster, that's when it needs to happen, right? So we need to sort that out as well.
I
So,
mean,
so
audience, if you could see me hallelujahing over here,
right,
because what Anthea is doing is, in the world where information overload is happening, we cannot expect everybody to know. Like I said, I did my research and just happened upon Sedima.
Right.
I don't know if anyone else was even aware of their existence in the diaspora. I'm not in the
Right.
region, so in the region might have some awareness, but in the diaspora, especially when you said the diaspora, we mobilize and we're a self-sustaining network. When I share this with other people, they were like, "What?" They didn't know about it. So we have to strengthen the communication. And I kind of said, like, I don't know, I'm not saying this is wrong, but you just educated me a lot about what they actually do. And
Right.
what we have to do a better job of is bridging the organizations in the region and how they're communicating with the diaspora, because we don't know. There can't be an assumption that we do know.
Right.
And we need to
And
do a better job of that.
and only thing I would want to add, so so one is the mitigation, the risk, the preparedness, but of course, recovery is ongoing. So you already know Hurricane Beryl, they're still recovering,
Yes.
right? You restore normalcy, you build resilience in affected communities, right? But it's about long-term reconstruction and development that needs to happen. So the money should not have stopped. And the key thing is, where do you keep on sending this money to do these different things? So we know that in Grenada, rebuilding of homes, it was battered. So rebuilding of homes still needs to happen today, right? Schools, hospitals, right? The infrastructure needs to be more disaster resilient. So now it's about building. So when they build now in 2025, we have to make sure that they are within the disaster resilient framework, or regulations. That's pretty important. Financial aid for job support for businesses and workers. I already explained that women are probably on the front line. So if you see civil society organizations that are providing support to women, that is being proactive in the space. And of course, one of the things that's also very important is psychosocial support. Is also offering mental health and trauma counseling, not for those that are just experienced it, but those that are worried about it happening as well. So one of the things we do focus a lot on the physical infrastructure when we talk about disaster, but there's a mental health issue that needs to be addressed. Young children in particular who have not able to go to school. You look in St. Vincent with the volcano. Can you imagine the disruption in those families and what that means? So we need to do assessments on what really happened to those families psychologically and what kind of supports that they need, what kind of counseling they need, right? So we need to make sure that disaster management plans that SEDEMA has and all the different national disaster organizations have in their independent countries, that they incorporate the lessons learned so that this year, 2025, those lessons of 2024 are incorporated and that we don't make those mistakes again. And strategies that were working, we need to keep on doing it as well. So if you want to provide support to women groups now, you are being proactive in the space. There is a organization, the chair of our board, she runs Glasgow Chain Foundation, and she last year provided support to entrepreneurs, to businesses within Jamaica that lost everything in their business and they needed to start up again. So if you're wanting to provide support to entrepreneurs within St. Elizabeth now, you are being proactive in the space. It doesn't necessarily has to be a disaster written all over, but it means that these are the issues that are imminent, that would address the issue of mitigation and risk, and provide support to these businesses ahead of time. And so, I would urge that if the diaspora wants to give, um, they have to continue to give throughout the year. And that would address a lot of the issues before the next disaster happens, which is going to happen in between July and November, as you astutely shared in your last podcast. Is what it's going to strike again, and we all know that it's getting faster and furious and more furious, and if policies within the global environment are not adhered to, and we see a lot of retraction happening in that space, it means that we're going to feel the heat even more. Figuratively and literally, our seas are going to be warmer. And it just means that hurricanes are going to come more faster and they can become more furious. And we're going to be the ones bearing the brunt, right? We're the ones that least contribute to CO2, but at the same time, we're the ones that feel it the most down here in the global south and in particular in the Caribbean. And so, yeah, so we have, in terms of giving, we have to look at all aspects of the disaster cycle. You know, if you want to give money before it happens, you want to give money during, or you want to give money for the recovery, it's a cycle. I would say it's a cycle. And I think it's important that it's not a one-time response, and that each phase fits into the other. And recovery should include stronger mitigation measures, as I say, to prevent repeated disasters. And at the same time, when they talk about it, they talk about integrating risk reduction, preparedness, response, and recovery, all at the same time. And that, you know, we have to have a response that addresses all of that, and the cycle of the disaster realities on the ground.
I am, again, very grateful for this conversation because you're already educating us that um, supporting disaster recovery happens before, during, and after. And I don't think many people realize that after the headlines and the news cycle have gone away, there's still work to do, right? We,
Yeah.
especially when we live in the diaspora. Remember, so you're mostly speaking to a diaspora audience, right? We don't get, other than social media or being intentional, if you subscribe to One Spot News or wherever, and I'm not endorsing one over the other to stay connected to Jamaica, you're
Mm-hmm.
not seeing the constant news cycle of what recovery looks like. We get maybe the 1 week, maybe 2 week news cycle, and after that, it's out of our cycle. And it's like almost an out of sight, out of mind type thing, unless you have family in affected countries. And so you are still connected in a way. But you know that, what happens in Grenada is not only Grenadian support, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Caribbean and the diaspora largely comes together to support. Now, my question for you, because you've given us a lot of, at least you've given me a lot of information. Where can the diaspora, where can we go and identify organizations that we want to support during or before, during, and after, in or anywhere in that cycle? Is that on your website? Is there another way? Educate
Yeah.
us on that, because I think
Right.
that is the
There's no
critical piece that we
right.
need to be able to share that information.
Right. And I guess there's no real hotspot. I can say that, you know, you can come to Carrefour and you get all the information, go to Sidima and you can get all the information. There's a governmental body that you should go to. So Sidima probably is the space that you would go if you want to see what's happening across the Caribbean. In the philanthropy space within Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, what we did last year is that what we called Trusted Partners Initiative, which was really saying to the world that, okay, um, the disaster struck, and you know, but here are some organizations that you can go to. So Sedimo is on the list. We actually had the meteorology organization on the list. We had Sanders Foundation on the list. We had ICNAC on the list. And what we said was, and you notice we didn't have 50 people on the list. Why? Because we said we wanted to ensure that whoever we are recommending, we understand, we know what they're doing, right? So the issue of trust is very important, and we know that the money, when it goes there, it's going to be used in a way where the money is going to be shared in a way that meets the mission of that particular organization. So it not because, you know, they are an organization that we would say is a great place to go, because that they are there at the time that the disaster happens. They are on the ground, 100%. But they're also doing recovery work as we speak, right? So it's not just feeding and shelter, but it's also dealing with the trauma. So they would have services throughout the year where they are providing psychosocial supports to families within the Caribbean. So, you know, I would say the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance is a good space to start. One of the things that we're looking at is sort of like a resilience fund is what we want to build. And that resilience fund is not necessarily disaster fund necessarily, but a resilience fund where
Listen,
you can come into the space, into the Caribbean philanthropic space, and you can say, I want to give money to women, right? Women entrepreneurs, because if they're more financially empowered, that when a disaster strikes, they are able to withstand that disaster more. Because that's also very important, you know. And so, you know, if you want to give money to organizations providing educational resources, they're the same thing. It's the same thing. Or as you all know, that you know, in the time of disaster, as many as know, we are more at risk in terms of sexual assaults and all those things. But if you want to give money into women who are facing issues around sexual molestation. There are organizations that do that. You can give money there. So that's part of that will be part of the resiliency fund as well. It will give the opportunity for the diaspora to decide how they and where they want to give as well. So of course, I would say Caribbean Alliance is a good spot as well. Of course, there are UN organizations that are doing great work. You know, and you can go directly to them. There's, you know, UNESCO, there's UN
women.
portals that you can go to
Hmm.
as well. And, you know, we're dealing with the issue of fragmentation. It's a real issue, right? It's fragmented. And so there needs to be more realignment in terms of a place in which people can go and feel that they can trust. And you know, trust only comes with relationships as well. It's just reality. You could can't sugarcoat it really.
Yeah.
It's about building relationships. So, you know, the philanthropic communities that you want to give to, you have to have sometimes have to have relationships with them as well, and see that there's a credibility there, and look at those organizations that are connected within the spaces that you're in, and just say that it's not all about disaster. It's also about opportunities that exist. You know, we have a strong arts and culture organizations that you know that is robust, that needs to be healthy. We have so much talent here in the Caribbean, and you know, the stronger you know our young people are, and the ability to be able to provide supports where there's already strength will make us stronger in a time of disaster. It's almost like you know you need to prop us up now so that when disaster comes we're more resilient. And there's so many different innovations and spaces where you can provide support as well. And arts and culture is really like it's almost is the lifeblood of the Caribbean. It's our gold as well. Yes, we have the sea and the sun, but we also have the people, and the people are the ones that are, you know, our human resources is our stronghold within the Caribbean, and we really need to provide support to them.
Mm.
And by providing support to them, you're providing support to the world, because the entry point to the world is also the Caribbean. If you support the Caribbean, I mean, the biggest piece here is now why support the Caribbean. We support the Caribbean for many different reasons, and one is that we can tell a story about resilience that we can share with the world. I think that is something that I think is very critical. I would say that we are proving ground for resilience in the Caribbean, and that we are a microcosm of global challenges, whether in climate action, disaster response, or economic diversification. We have innovations here that we can teach the rest of the world. And then, of course, you know, I look at you, Carrie Ann, you're in the diaspora. Look at who you are. You're amazing. You are here
Mhm.
advocating on behalf of the Caribbean because the diaspora connections make the difference. You know, we call it the multiplier effect. You know, you contribute in so many different ways to the space for in arts and culture. Carrie Ann, I don't know your background completely, but you know, the diaspora community contributes significantly to the economies of the world. You know, so if you support us in the Caribbean, the multiplier effect is amazing. And
Yeah.
you know, when we talk about philanthropy, we talk about philanthropy as being catalytic, you know, meaning that philanthropy is a space where we understand that governments and you know multilateral agencies alone cannot solve Caribbean challenges,
Hmm.
and philanthropy can sort of fill those critical gaps We can support the grassroots organizations, we can mobilize communities, can build adaptive systems, and we have recognized that we have to do it together. And government can play a role, plays a significant role for scaling, but philanthropy can catalyze and make things happen. So that global philanthropy that I talked about, which includes the diaspora, we can actually catalyze a lot of innovations by small giving, and also the big millions of dollars as well. But we can make that critical difference within the space.
I am so grateful for this conversation. And as you wrap up, I just want to make sure that the resilience list or fund that you are doing, if just to make sure that once that is in place, you share that with me so I can disseminate that to my audience, and encourage people to go check out Caribbean Philanthropy Alliance, because it starts with education and knowledge and awareness about what exists and how you know we all work on a budget, so we go start budget out,
Right.
the giving, right? The
Mhm.
support, before June. June is June
Right
is
here.
right there. June is right there.
Mhm.
And so this episode obviously is coming out before June. So before June, we have to get ourselves in a place. And it don't stop at June. We anticipate, because I lived through Hurricane Gilbert. I mean, and I know what that was like. You even bringing up the mental health support after. I didn't think of it honestly, because I remember going through Gilbert and thought I had a fun time. I couldn't imagine what my mom was going through, or my grandmother, everyone else was going through. As now as an adult, I can appreciate some of the things that they probably were dealing with. So you've just brought something to my attention that, like, yeah, obviously this makes sense, but when until someone says it, you're like, oh, you're right, that is something we need to address, right?
Mhm. Yes.
So support, you want to make sure we are ready to support when June come, but hurricane season go all through. But as I said in my previous episode, we don't have to wait till a hurricane hits. We
And,
have to do mitigation, we have to prep, we have to do a whole bunch of things. So we shouldn't be wait
and
the
yes, I agree. And at
hurricane
least,
coming is we late. We need
yeah.
to be
And
prepping,
you know,
because
but in terms of philanthropy, one of the things it helps you with, and that's why I'll say, I'm pitching to say join Careful Alliance. We're a membership organization as well. If you want to be part of a giving community and you want to give and you want to, you are personal, you want to donate personally, you can do that absolutely. And if you have large sums of money and you're a corporation or a business and you want to join Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, this is the time to do it because you'll meet other business people like yourself who are thinking strategically. Okay, this is how I want to give. Like you may have $10,000, but then you may have 10 people with 10,000. Now you have $100,000. Now we can put an interesting program together. And you couldn't do it by yourself, but you can do it within a space where there are others that are partners like you to think together about how to give. And so I would just invite everyone to, you can peruse the website, and if you want to join as a corporate person, a business person, or individually, and you're a change maker and you want to advocate for a particular cause, there's a space for you. And the key thing here is that you have people like yourselves who can think together about how we build not only a stronger Caribbean philanthropic space, but also how do we give back to the Caribbean and to ensure that our brothers and sisters have what they need in times of disasters and before. So I'll just invite everybody to join and to be part of the movement.
thank you so much. And, I think that's a great place to end. Join, be a
Mhm.
member, because you know where your money is going. You build trust. You learn about the organization. You you build trust, and you have a level of confidence, because again, we have coworkers, we have colleagues, and I don't know if anything about you, but I have some really great colleagues that I work with, and I'm at 9 to 5. Something happens, they're like, "Oh my goodness, is everything happen? Is your family okay?" And they'll be like, "Where can people send donations?" So it's not only just you, your work colleagues also we may want to support you, and so now you can have confidence to say, here's a trusted organization that you can send donations to. So
And
it's
it's
not just people in the Caribbean, it's those people connected to us who want to support, and we can now confidently say, here are some places that you can send money to help the Caribbean in any part of the cycle of recovery, right? and
right.
and I'm really excited that we are able to have this conversation. It's
So,
just the beginning, and it's also for us to stay connected to organizations like this, to keep up with what's happening, so we can speak knowledgeably to our peers, family members, and to build trust, because let's be honest, some people may have been burnt from giving previously, so they're suspicious, and so we have to rebuild trust even within our own communities, and it starts here with knowledge and connecting to the right organization. So, Anthea, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast, for educating us about all the stages of recovery and the unseen aspects of recovery, which is the social, emotion, the psychological, social, emotional aspects of recovery for adults and children. And I'll make sure I'll put everything about where people could connect, websites, social media, in the show notes.
yes, and I'll send you information so you can do your promotions the way you do it.
Yes.
And thank you for your wonderful platform. And, I look forward to sharing with you again and connecting with you again. And I want to come and join Carafil as well.
Wonderful.
I'd love to have you.
Oh, thank you. All right, so we're not going to end the conversation. So Anthony and I will have a little chit chat in the after show. But as I love to say at the end of every episode, walk good. And if you're not a member of the Carry On Friends community, please come over and join. I'll have information about that in the show notes. And again, like me say, walk good.
Walk good, my sister. Walk good.
Thank you.